Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Business with Lee Meadows here on Facebook Live. This is our first show in this process, and it's an idea that came to me through conversations with a number of folks in my network and friends and colleagues who say, it's time to start reaching out to those of you who are out there, even though we're kind of under this whole COVID thing, and make sure that we are still taking care of ourselves and thinking about our careers and doing some things related to business and all that. And so I said, well, why not? I think this is something that we can do. So we are starting our first segment of Let's Talk Business, because when we talk business, we learn how to take care of business. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Lee Meadows. I'm a professor of management at Walsh College. I also run Meadows Consulting, where we do leadership development work. We do a lot of work around diversity, organizational change, and development. And I've been an active practitioner in the world of business for sometimes longer than I care to remember. I've spent a lot of my time working at Walsh College and being a professor of management there, teaching business to our working adult students. And I also spent a lot of time out in the community as a consultant, working with business and heading up a few different kinds of nonprofit organizations, working on their boards and those kinds of things. So we're going to use this segment. This is our first opening inaugural segment to talk about let's take care of business and let's talk about business. And we want to do that in a way that makes a lot of sense. Now, in order to do something like this, it's not something that you do alone. And one of the things that we want to make sure we do is to be thankful to those folks who have been supportive of both me as a profession, in my profession, those folks who have worked with us in some of the organizations, specifically the National Association of African Americans and Human Resources, who've been great sponsors with us, Walsh College. And so we take a few minutes to thank our new friends, Christy and Mike at Secret Solutions, and Priority Health out of Grand Rapids has been doing a lot of work down here in the Southeast Michigan area, and we're grateful for their support. I want to send a shout out to my good buddy, Ovell Barbie, who's handling human resources and diversity at Spectrum Health. And also another shout out to Carrie Tingle out of Bridgewater Interiors, who've been just absolutely great in their support for us and the organization. Of course, I got to say something about where I work, Walsh College, and all the support they've been doing for us. And our folks at Great Lake Benefit Group, we're looking at Kareem and Percy and Rob and Michelle. Thank you for all your support. And my buddy Gerald Lee over at Paylocity, we appreciate that. And a lot of the support we've been getting from Heritage Optical, we appreciate a lot of that. And of course, we wouldn't be doing a lot of this without help from our good friend Brenda Miller over at Miller Marketing. They've been all these folks have been just absolutely wonderful in support of a lot of the things that we've done over the years, and we look forward to continuing with their support as well. Now, why are we doing this show? We're doing this show as a way of taking different aspects of who we are in the business world and start to look at those in various segments. So we're going to explore different topics every week that pertain to your career in business, or your career in any organization. We're going to look at it from a personal development standpoint. We're going to look at it from a professional development standpoint. We're going to look at some of the things that have been challenging in the workplace, and the mere fact that we all been under this COVID-19 thing across the country, and it's got some serious implications for the workplace and what the workplace is going to look like and all that. So let's take some time to really begin to think about what that anymore. So those are some of the things that we have to talk about. And today we're going to talk about specifically the idea of career branding. Now, career branding is a topic that has been enjoying a lot of popularity lately. And there have been a number of folks who have taken this whole focus of the career ladder and the career portfolio and begin to take it to a different level and say, you know what, the thing that you really have to begin to think about is who you are as an individual, what distinguishes you from someone else, and recognizing that in many ways that constitutes what we call a career brand. Now, this comes in lieu of some of the things that we used to believe. Now, I'm pretty much old school, and I can take you far back in terms of some of the kind of organizational lexicon that used to exist in preceding decades. Boy, I sure hate having to say it like that, but it's true. But for a significant population of us, there was a time when we thought about when we were thinking about careers. A lot of you can relate to the notion of, well, we used to ask the question, 5 years from now, what do you want to be doing? 5 years from now, what do you want to be doing? And that was always, that took into account the fact that, well, maybe the organization had a little more stability around it. Certain things were a little bit more predictable, that we could, for the most part, have the internal resources and stability in the organization to move up what was known as the career ladder. And that really sustained us for a long time. We just really had to take into account the fact that the organization had this blanket of security, and that it, for the most part, represented your professional interests, both internally to the organization. And then things changed. Funny things began to happen along the way, and the next thing we know, the financial crisis of 2007, the meltdowns that occurred in the early part of the beginning of the century, when all those things culminate with the actual gutting of the organization and kind of tearing out a lot of the middle, it forced us into a complete rethinking of how do we approach our careers. Is the path to our careers still unique and representative within the internal organization in which we serve so well? Well, over the years, we found out that doesn't tend to be true anymore. And so the notion of thinking about the career ladder in one place at one time became a little less relevant. And the notion of managing my career across a spectrum of organizations began to open itself up and become the reality. Such that now we don't ask the question 5 years from now, what do you want to be doing? We ask the question, 5 years from now, who do you want to be? And when we put it in that context, 5 years from now, who do you want to be? It conjures up a variety of ways of thinking about how we approach our career, a variety of ways of questions that can be asked, things that we can begin to say to ourselves about, well, where does my primary loyalties reside? Can I be completely and totally loyal to an organization and invest an entire career in one organization? Do I want to accumulate a number of skills and abilities across a series of organizations? How do I wish to do that? And in today's environment, whether you're working in whether in a for-profit section or a non-profit section, one of the things that just becomes important is, how do I begin to shape and fashion my career so that it works well for who I am and some of the things that I wish to try and accomplish. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about career branding as part of the Let's Talk Business process. And I'm going to start by giving you some things to think about as we begin to pursue a lot of this. One of the statements that I like is a statement that was written by an author named Peggy Kloss. And she wrote this great book, and I would recommend that you all try this great book entitled Brag, Tooting Your Own Horn Without Blowing It. Tooting your own horn without blowing it. And what she essentially meant by that is, and this is her direct quote, she says, in today's cutthroat business world, where job security is virtually non-existent, bragging is a necessity, not a choice. How about that? It's a necessity, not a choice. Remaining quiet about your successes only leads to being underappreciated and overlooked. And I'm wondering how many of you, as you begin to think about your career and some of the things that you've had to encounter along the way, I wonder how many of you have given a lot of thought to, well, I wonder if I am in a situation where I'm being underappreciated and undervalued. And while it may not be the intent of the organization to do something like that, when the context begins to change, it means the thinking around how you approach things also has to change. So let me start off by sharing some information with you. Again, this is a great quote that we have seen it been put in action. But here's what I want you to think about. In your career, do you recognize that your career now is your choice? It's not something that happens to you. It happens something that's a direct result of your own initiative. What are the things that you want to put in place that make your career vibrant, that keep you active in your career, that keep you moving forward in your career in ways that you think are best? And a lot of it really starts with this very basic question. What is your value proposition? What is your value proposition? When you begin to think of this notion of branding, it's really about a value proposition that you have as a unique individual, and what that tends to mean for some of the things that you've been attempting to do. So, one way of thinking about your value proposition is to begin to look at this notion of, well, what are some of the things that make me unique? What are the assets that I bring into formulating my own brand? Now, this particular quadrant, portfolio, if you will, gives some representation of what that might look like. So here are the things you begin to assess, and these are things that you do prior to putting together your resume, for instance. These are the things that you spend some time thinking about and asking yourself questions. All right, what is it that I bring to the party that makes me unique and different? And so in the upper left quadrant, one of the things you begin to look at is, okay, over the years, what's the education that I've put together? What are the certifications that I've gotten? What are the basic credentials that have allowed me to sharpen both my knowledge and my skills in certain areas? And once I know and understand that, how have I gone about implementing, or how have I used those educational certifications to help make a difference in the organization that I serve? Once you've kind of gotten some assessment around that, you want to look at the upper right quadrant. We start asking yourself, now, since I've been at this, what have been some of the skills that I have developed? Am I particularly good at problem solving? Am I particularly good? How are my communication skills? And believe me, according to a lot of the research, communication skills continues to come up as the number one skill that organizational members look for around folks who can be effective leaders. Maybe I've developed some skills around team building that I want to continue to promote. But do some kind of assessment of what's the education that you've accumulated and what's the skills that you've accumulated, and give those skills some kind of priority. Do you know that you are particularly good at problem solving? Do you know that you're particularly good at decision making? And what makes you particularly good at it? And oftentimes, what makes you particularly good at something is some of the action items that have been a direct result of the skill that you've used. In the lower left-hand quadrant, what have been your leadership experiences? And ladies and gentlemen, this topic never goes away. It's been around since the dawn of time. It continues to be one of those areas of assessment that in many ways begins to distinguish one person from the other. Now, you could have come about your leadership experiences through a variety of different roles in an organization. Most folks at some point in time find themselves in the role of being some kind of supervisor, where you have people reporting directly to you. Well, that's a unique leadership experience. You may have been someone who's a coordinator, and a coordinator is responsible for trying to bring together resources and human capital around particular projects from across the organization. Well, that involves some kind of team building, that involves some kind of project management, that involves some kind of resource allocation. So it's one of those things that you want to get a good assessment around. Then, of course, if you've been in any kind of manager role, that's kind of a precursor to what we typically think of as some kind of leadership experience. Well, you want to go back and begin to get some kind of assessment around that to see if indeed that's something that's working well for you. And then finally, in the lower right-hand quadrant, who are your network? Who are the individuals that make up your particular unique brand? Who are the folks that you associate with by way of either affinity group or project teams or boards that you happen to be sitting on any number of things like that tend to make up this particular experience. Once you've kind of done some assessment around that, then one of the things that you then want to begin to look at is how do you begin to leverage your network? All of us have a network. I believe that that movie back in, I believe it was the 1990s, 6 Degrees of Separation. What does that essentially mean? That means that you know someone who knows someone who knows someone who can help in ways that you might not be thinking about. All right, is this person your former college roommate who, while you may not have that person may not have a strong physical presence. In other words, they live in some other state or something like that, but you still have a strong experience connection. What is he or she doing in terms of their own life, and what kind of network do they represent that you have access to? We don't tend to spend a lot of time thinking about, well, who's in our network. Well, start asking yourself, well, who are my family members? And who do my family members know? For me personally, I have siblings and nieces and nephews who currently reside in the Atlanta area. And they've been residing in Atlanta for a long time, though we all started out in Michigan. Well, they all have their own certain levels of success, which has worked well for them. But in doing that, they've also formulated their own networks of people with whom they communicate and interact with down in the Atlanta area. So if there was something that I needed to know about Atlanta or I needed to have access to in Atlanta, someone in my network of folks down there probably knows someone. All right? Who do you hang out with? Or who do you hang out with in your fraternity and sorority? When you get beyond family, then it's your affinity groups, fraternities, sororities, boards, people that you play golf with. We all have a stronger network than we sometimes let on. And spending time assessing that network is going to be critical to really kind of understanding your own brand. Because here's the truth of the matter. Whether you know it or not, you already have a brand. Right? So whether it's something that you do intentionally in terms of letting people know who you are, or whether it's something that's unintentional that creates a perception about who you are. In any way, shape, or form, you already have a brand. You may not know what it is, and that's the thing that you have to assess. What is the message that I'm conveying to my network, both internal to the organization and external to the organization? And if you don't know what it is, then you have to start generating some feedback as to what you think it is based on how people perceive you. Ask your close friends, ask your spouse, ask your folks in your affinity network. Ask them this. Here's the question: if I represent a brand, what do you think is the message from my brand? So you may not know what it is, and it may not be accurate, and more importantly, it may not be the brand you want. So getting information in regards to how you are perceived is feedback about, for the most part, what constitutes your brand. This whole career branding thing means that your brand is your reputation. And so you have to find ways to demonstrate why you are different from the rest. Because that becomes part of the whole branding process. When we are talking branding, we are talking about what it is that you do as an individual that stands out from everyone else. And here's a kind of an ongoing definition of what that means. The career branding is just the process of acting on a long-term premise to consistently distinguish what you do by adding competitive value, all right, by adding competitive value to what you do, and value to those tangible and intangible elements connected to your particular success. Now just think about that. It's an intentional act based on a long-term premise of making yourself a lot more competitive in what's about to become an even more competitive global workplace. In many ways, ladies and gentlemen, it's all about the brand. It's all about the brand and how you begin to position yourself to become even more successful as you move forward. Now, there are a lot of good reasons why you have to start thinking about this relative to what happens when we start to go back into the workplace. One of the resources I was able to identify on LinkedIn, and this is a very good resource. There's a resource on LinkedIn Learning called Personal Branding, and it features a young person named Chelsea Crost. Now, Chelsea Crost is by far one of the most prolific personal brand people that I've ever encountered. I've watched a lot of her work. I tend to follow some of the things that she does, and she really understands the personal branding process. Now, part of her focus is personal branding in terms of working with millennials, but a lot of the things that she talks about, a lot of things that she has made us aware of, has a direct application to some of the things that you all are trying to accomplish in your life. So I highly recommend that as a resource for beginning the personal branding process. Now, obviously, there are other resources that you can start to explore. If you want to go ahead and Google the whole notion of career branding, what you're going to find is that there have been a number of books that have been written about it. A number of articles have started to emerge because of that. People like myself and others are starting to specialize in how do you begin to help individuals with this personal branding process. But one of the things that you have to begin to think of it, ladies and gentlemen, is personal branding is really not about, as Peggy pointed out, you're really not bragging as much as you are distinguishing. You're not bragging, and you're not being overly humble. You're making absolutely certain that the picture of who you are is an accurate representation of who you are striving to be. And whatever those skills, those competencies, those ideas, whatever those things happen to be, those are the things that go into the whole shaping of who you are and the whole notion of, well, what do I want to, 5 years from now, who is it that I want to be? Do not think of it from the standpoint of being selfish, because that's not what you're doing. What you're doing is beginning to identify, if I'm going to be involved in this thing called a career, if I'm going to be investing time and energy and resources in what will be my career, what are some of the things that I want to make sure happens from point A to point Z? Now, it could mean any number of things in terms of in terms of how you begin to distinguish yourself from someone else. But some of the things you might want to start taking into account. Are you the kind of person who likes to write short articles, or do you like to create a blog or creative blog? Do you have a way of getting things posted around things you do on Facebook or things you do on LinkedIn? My son has 1,000 followers has 1,000 friends on Facebook, and while to this day I still don't know what that means, that means what it essentially means that if he wanted to start his own blog, if he really wanted to start to put himself out there in terms of distinguishing his brand, well, he already has a built-in audience for doing something like that because he has 1,000 friends on Facebook. You may have a number of followers on LinkedIn. Well, how well are you using those followers? And I'm not using in a negative sense, but how well are you using those followers to help you begin to distinguish your brand from some of the other things that other people are doing? And again, this is food for thought. This is just primarily designed to broaden your thinking and anchor your focus around what are some of the things that I think are going to be important in terms of really starting to advance my career and move my career forward. And these are the kind of things that we want to spend time talking about on a weekly basis. When we talk about Let's Talk Business, these are some of the things that we want to do. We want to be able to share resources. As this thing begins to unfold, it's clearly my intention to bring some guest speakers on, all people authoring books that I think are going to be important, to give you access to resources about things that are going on. For example, the Detroit chapter of the Society for Human Resource Management, Detroit SHRM, well, next Tuesday they're putting on a webinar entitled, while it has an HR focus, it clearly has a leadership and management focus, but they put on a workshop entitled, it's time to bring them back. In other words, the states are starting to ease their guidelines, and we've got to start bringing people back to work. Well, that's got serious implications for planning and for strategy and for all the things that we didn't have to think about before that now we have to think about. So if you find yourself with some free time, and I suspect a lot of you have some free time, next Tuesday from 1 to 2 o'clock, there will be this free webinar on, now it's time to bring them back. And while we won't have all of the answers, hopefully we'll have enough of the right questions that we can ask that we can begin to share some light on this. So these are some of the kinds of things that I want to spend some time exploring. And when we do Facebook Live with Lee Meadows, Let's Talk in Business, I want to hear from you. If you got ideas about things that I should explore, topics that you think need to be managed, issues that you want to spend a little bit of time, that you want to get a little more clarity on and all that, send it to me. I'm there on Meadows Consulting. You saw where I am on Facebook. You saw where I am on LinkedIn. I want this opportunity to be the best opportunity for you. I want to share the kind of information that's going to be helpful in terms of carving out your particular career and getting you ready for the things that are about to happen. So, as my way of saying goodbye and thanking you for this opportunity, let me just say that one of the lessons that I've learned over the years is that when people talk about how do you make a difference, I found that the best way to make a difference is to be the difference. And that oftentimes, if we want something to happen, we have to be the individuals to make it happen. So for now, this has been Lee Meadows. You have been live. We're here live on Facebook. We're here to talk about business, and I look forward to having the opportunity to talk about business with you at some later time. Thanks for tuning in, and stay safe out there as well.